So we are joined by Almudena Pradera. She's a doctor of veterinary medicine. She has a PhD in pharmacology and physiology, and she's also Chief Scientific Officer at Equicord. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Obviously, we're going to talk about HorStem today. So I've just got some questions for you, which I was hoping we could have a conversation around. Firstly, why do you select the umbilical cord as your source of stem cells, and what are the advantages of this?
Well, there are a lot of advantages. The first one is the safety of the tissue, the animal welfare, and the quality of the tissue. Umbilical cord offers us incredible advantage compared to other sources, mainly due to the size of the tissue and to the nature of the tissue. The umbilical cord obviously is the youngest tissue that we can obtain, because we obtain obviously from newborns. So they are the youngest cell possible. That makes a tissue with more quality. Then it is also more safer, because the risk of virus transmission in umbilical cord is less than in any other tissues obtained from adult animals. So there is a safer tissue, and also it is a tissue that is 100% in line with animal welfare. Our studs are concerned studs that are located in geographic areas free of disease. All our mares and our foals has been a follow-up with a veterinary service before, during, and after the delivery. All our foals have been bred with natural reasons. Any animal has been damaged for the reason of obtaining the umbilical cord, and no animal has been bred only for the obtaining of the tissue. So we are 100% in line with animal welfare. And once we obtain our tissues, we transport them to our laboratory, where the stem cells are extracted. We manufacture the stem cells, and we test for all the potential contaminants of the tissue. And our foals can continue with their moms until they are willed.
HorStem is pure mesenchymal stem cells. Why are non-differentiated stem cells advantageous?
Yes, that's a good question. Years ago, when the stem cells were discovered, we thought that the mechanism of action was thanks to the differentiation capacity, because in the definition of the stem cells, it is said that there are cells that have the capacity to differentiate in different tissues. In fact, for be sure that we have stem cells, we have to differentiate them. So it is something that is absolutely well known. So we thought that if we inject 1 million cells in a joint, will become in 1 million chondrocytes that will attach to the tissue and play a function. Unfortunately, that's not the real mechanism of action. And now we know that the stem cells that we inject will not persist in the joint for long term, will not engraft in the tissue, and will not play a function themselves. What the stem cells really do is to modulate and immunomodulate all the host cells to create the ideal environment, the anti-inflammatory and the regenerative environment. So the differentiation of the cells is not something that is going to happen. What we are looking for is to the immunomodulatory effect. And we know that the oldest the cells are, the more differentiated the cells are, and the more in culture the cells have been, the less immunomodulatory capacity. So if we are looking for a potent immunomodulatory capacity, we should look for young cells. Umbilical cord is the youngest possible. The less differentiated, that's why we select pure mesenchymal stem cells with all the pluripotent capacity, and non-differentiate them to different tissues, and cells that has not been many times cultured, because we know that the more the cells are cultured, the less immunomodulatory capacity. Once again, this is an advantage of the umbilical cord, because we have a very, very big tissue. We obtain a very big amount of cells for each umbilical cord. So we do not need to expand them in culture so much, because the source is so big in stem cells. So that's another advantage of the umbilical cord.
If the mechanism of action isn't differentiation, how do they work?
Well, the mechanism of action is really amazing. And when you deep on in the mechanism of action, you really get in love. The mechanism of action of the stem cells is through the modulation and the transformation of all the host cells. In the orange part of the presentation, you can we try to represent how a normal joint with osteoarthritis evolve. So when we have a horse that is jumping or running or rising, we have a small repeated trauma in the joint capsule, especially in the synoviocytes B. In response to this small repeated microtrauma, the synoviocyte B get inflamed and activated and secrete inflammatory cytokines to the synovial fluid, mainly interleukin-1, TNF-alpha. In response to these inflammatory cytokines, the body sends inflammatory cells to the synovial fluid. They have a homing message for the inflammatory cells that comes to the joint in an inflammatory mode. So we have an infiltration of macrophagous type 1 and T cells and B cells in the inflammatory phenotype. These inflammatory cells secrete inflammatory cytokines because they are in the role of inflammation, so they secrete inflammatory cytokines. So in the second stage of the disease, we have an inflammatory environment in the joint mediated by inflammatory cells in an inflammatory road with inflammatory cytokines. This inflammatory environment has very negative effects in the cartilage homeostasis. The cartilage is a very, very delicate tissue with a very delicate equilibrium between the catabolic and the anabolic activities. And it is very important that we take care about this equilibrium, because if something breaks the equilibrium and the cartilage start the degradation, the body has very low regeneration capacity. So if we lose the cartilage, it's going to be complicated for the body to try to restore the normal function. Unfortunately, this inflammatory environment broke this equilibrium and start with the degradation of the cartilage. With the degradation of the cartilage, degradative proteins are released to the synovial fluid, especially metalloproteinasas, that also have an inflammatory effect. So we can summarize that the inflammation caused the cartilage destruction and that the cartilage destruction promote the inflammation. That's why we have this chronic disease with the time, more and more inflammation, more and more cartilage destruction. Once the cartilage has been destroyed, the subchondral bone responds, but unfortunately, he's not able to respond with the creation of new cartilage. He responds with the creation of new bone. And that's what we see in the X-rays with the enterophytes and with the new tissue formation. And nowadays, we have many alternatives in the market that mainly work in the inflammatory cascade. We have a lot of different anti-inflammatory that blocks the cascade in different points and in different pathways, but we mainly work in the inflammatory cascade. The advantage that the stem cell gives us is a completely new mechanism of action that will work in the inflammation from the origin of the inflammation, that is the inflammatory cells that are secreting the inflammatory cytokines. Well, in the blue part, we represent how stem cell works. And once we inject HorStem in a joint, these stem cells get activated by all this inflammatory environment. And in response to this activation and in the contact with the inflammatory cells present in the synovial fluid, they release a lot of different cytokines and growth factors that modulate the host cells and transform the host cells. And when I say transform, literally, the stem cells transform the host cells. Macrophagous type 1, the inflammatory macrophagous, change the phenotype to macrophagous type 2, anti-inflammatory macrophagous. And T cells and B cells in a phenotype, inflammatory phenotype Th1, change to helper and regulator. So the population of the joints change and transform themselves from inflammatory cells to anti-inflammatory cells. Once we have changed to an anti-inflammatory phenotype of the immune cells, they secrete anti-inflammatory cytokines. That's why the duration of the effect of the stem cells is so long in time, because we are not blocking inflammatory cascades. We are working in the origin of the inflammation from a cellular level. We are putting the cells from the host working for the inflammation, the anti-inflammation of the joint and the homeostasis of the joint and the recovery of the normal health status of the joint. Once we have obtained this anti-inflammatory environment, in one hand, we have less clinical symptoms, lameness reduction, pain reduction, synovitis reduction, but also we try to restore the normal equilibrium and the normal balance of the cartilage. The stem cells create the ideal environment for the regeneration and for the repair of the tissue. But it's important that we keep in mind that is the own body the one who is going to regenerate. The stem cells will not play a function, will not attach to the cartilage, will not become chondrocytes. So if we are looking for a real regeneration of the cartilage, it's important that we take into consideration to use stem cells at the early beginning of the disease, because stem cells will create the ideal environment, but the regeneration capacity of the cartilage, we know that is limited. So if we wait so long and the disease is really, really advanced, the regeneration capacity is not going to be very, very high.
So what are the indications for HorStem?
HorStem indication is the reduction of lameness associated to mild to moderate osteoarthritis. We conduct our clinical trial in a total of 74 horses. In our clinical trial, we accept all kinds of joints, all kinds of activity levels, all age, all breed, all kind of use of the horses, because our idea was to have a good idea and a good understanding about the product and not only develop a clinical trial in a small population of horses. So we strongly demonstrate the efficacy of HorStem in the reduction of lameness. After one single dose of HorStem, we saw that in our clinical trial with a total of 74 horses, as I said, 72% of the horses remain with lameness grade 1 or less, compared to 22 in the placebo group, and this was strongly statistically significant. We also see improvement in the flexion pain and in the fusion, but obviously the lameness grade was the primary endpoint that we select, because is usually why we are called as vets. Moreover, in our study, we developed a 2 years follow-up study because we wanted to know the efficacy and the safety of the product in the long term, because as we said, one of the advantages of the stem cells is the very, very long-lasting effect. So we conduct a 2 years follow-up study. After 12 months, 83% of the horses remain without lameness after one single administration of HorStem. After 18 months, 65% of the horses remain without lameness. And at the end of the study, 24 months after the injection, 35% of the horses remain without lameness. So the duration of the effect was very, very, very long with only one administration. And well, we think that this is a very, very big advantage of the stem cell. It's super easy. I was a keen practitioner before, and in Spain, 99% of the vets goes with their car. So for me, it was crazy to develop a medicine that was not transportable or that could not be easily used in a stud. So HorStem has been developed as a ready-to-use product. The storage is very easy in a normal fridge, 2 to 8. And when you need to inject it, just remove from the fridge, move a little because stem cells are heavy, and goes to the bottom of the vial and directly inject in the horse, obviously a sterile approach. And we recommend to use one single dose of anti-inflammatory drugs the day of HorStem administration, because stem cells are known to be a bit inflammatory in the first hours. So trying to avoid this inflammation, we recommend one single dose of anti-inflammatory drugs. And apart from that, super easy, transportable, storage in a normal fridge, not mix, not defrosting, nothing else than directly injecting the horse.
Well, thank you so much, Almudena. This product is a licensed product in the UK. It's distributed by Nupsala. So if you do have any more questions, please contact us at info@nupsala.com.